Let's see. This is a weekly step meeting with a different speaker each week, speaking on the step of the week for approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and then open for discussion or questions until 7 p.m. And that brings us to our speaker on December 21st, 2020 in Doylestown, PA at the Monday night 6 p.m. Stay Alive Literature and Step Group at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Tonight's speaker is Marin, and he's going to share his experience on Step 10. Help me welcome him.
Thanks, guys. My name is Marin Harwood. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. Hopefully I'm projecting enough. I talk all day at work, so hopefully I'll be able to project enough for you guys. So, Step 10, as far as implementing it in my daily life, and it's, funny, the name of the group is the Stay Alive group, right? So, kind of interesting how when we can tie in Step 10, this is the way kind of I learned how to live on a daily basis. How to, as far as interactions and people in my life, and having gone through the step process up to this point, there is a part of it that it discusses an inventory, right? The fourth step in the 12 steps of recovery, where we do a personal inventory, right? Where we go through everything in our lives from in our past, from resentments to sex conduct to fears, right? And then the other step that has to deal with an inventory is Step 10. Right, continuing to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admitting it. Right, so it's already giving me a direction in the actual step itself on when I'm supposed to admit when I do or say something wrong, or in my case, when I say something before I think about it, typically is when this gets implemented. So I was taught a few things this time around, especially when it comes to the 10th step. I was really taught that. If I do an inventory, and I do one to the depths of my soul, it's fearless, it's searching, it's all of the above, why would I have to do another one of those unless I don't continue to take personal inventory as I go along? Some people are of the school of thought where they do a full-blown fourth step every year. And I know for me, they call it, Dr. Bob called it a house cleaning, right? A personal house cleaning in their inventory. So if I clean my house once a year, what's it going to look like 2-3 months down the line? It's going to be cluttered up with things again, and it's going to be a cluttered mess. So as I go along, this is my clean up things as I go along down the line. So in the big book, when it discusses the 10th step, it really talks about the entire 10th step is almost promise. The entire way, as you read the 5 paragraphs that are encompassed in the 10th step. We're not going to read all of them, but what I want to go over is the directions on exactly what to do, when something disturbs us in the 10th step. So on page 84, it goes over these things. It says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, right, that's in the middle of a sentence, I'm going to stop there. It says, when these crop up, not if, but when. Right? We already know with resentment, resentment is basically, it means to refeel. It's a Latin word, centar, which means to feel. So resentment means to refeel the same emotion over and over and over again. Earlier in the book, it tells us resentment can kill. But it's telling us that we're going to feel that again. We are going to feel resentment. We're going to be dishonest. There's going to be selfishness, and there's going to be fear. When these crop up, right, in the 4 disciplines of the 10th step. I don't know if anyone's ever broken it down this way, but there are 4 disciplines in order to continue to take a personal inventory. The first one of these is we ask God at once to remove them, right? So we're going to upper management first, right? The middle management, it turns out, when issues like this come up, don't really have an ability to handle this, from the jump. So we go to upper management first. Our higher power, whether you call it God, higher power, whatever, or, spirit of the universe, creative intelligence, whatever you call it, it doesn't necessarily matter. But we ask God to remove them at once. Remove it, right? At once. So ask, whenever it says we ask in the big book, is a prayer. So it's literally telling us when we feel these things, we pray. First thing, right? At once. It's like any sort of directions. When it tells you to do something right away or at once, you don't get the same result if you wait till later to do it, right? So at once, we ask God to remove it. Very simple prayer, right? So let's say, let's use a for an example from me. Most of my disturbances come along in traffic, Anyone like relate to that? So this morning it happened. On my way into work, all of a sudden, flashing lights, right? Traffic stopped. And of course, I am disturbed by this because I need to get where I need to go when I need to get there, right? I think my time's more important than everyone else's. That's typically what the feeling is when I'm stuck in traffic. So there's a disturbance right there, a disturbance. Fear is typically not getting something I want or losing something that I have. So in that instance, there's a fear for me that I'm not going to get what I want and get to work early, really, or on time, however you want to look at it, right? I don't think of other things. I don't think of maybe that person that was in an accident ahead of me. I don't pray for, typically, when it's in that moment, I'm only thinking about me and what I need to get. Right, so there's the fear, right, and then dishonesty can come up with anything, like say a white lie, or I'm at work and I want to displace my boss's anger onto somebody else and not onto me. So I'll maybe say something dishonest, or I'll leave out the whole truth. There are a multitude of examples of those four things that we can do throughout the day. When we catch it in that moment, right, or maybe a little bit later, whatever the case is, at once we ask God to remove it. Right? And then the second discipline is we discuss them with someone immediately. I like to take the context of the big book when it was written and think about it this way. When this book was written, let's just use an example of our founder, Bill Wilson. Could Bill Wilson pick up his cell phone and send a direct message to his sponsor, Ebby, when something was going down? No. Could he text him? FaceTime him? No. What he had to do was he had to have people around him so he could discuss this stuff with someone immediately. Not necessarily, it could be anybody really, but it's telling us exactly when to do these things. This is kind of really important so far with what we're learning about the 10th step. I know for me, to discuss it with somebody immediately, it's very, very difficult. And yet I have the means, something in my pocket or close by where I can pick it up, hit a couple of buttons on this phone, and get in touch with anybody at any time. It's very difficult for somebody like me because I want to do it my time and in my way, and I don't want somebody else to tell me what to do. Right? That's just, again, it's selfishness and self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our troubles. So for me, doing this, again, it's giving me a timestamp. Discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we had harmed anyone. Now again, discussing these things with someone who may understand, right, as far as a sponsor, a spiritual advisor, or someone in your network, seemingly important because a lot of times I can't see where I harm somebody in the moment. Other times I can. Again, in traffic, and someone cuts me off, giving them what I'll use as a gentle term is giving them the Philly salute, right? Which is not a kind gesture, right? It's hard to make amends to them right away, but what is easy to do is to give somebody a call and say, "Listen, I'm disturbed." First I make my call upstairs, right, and then I make my lateral call to somebody, and then if I can make amends, then I make amends right away. And then the next part is seemingly lost a lot of times. This is the fourth discipline of the 10th step. This is what gets us out of our selfishness and self-centered thinking. So then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Right? So the fourth step has four disciplines. I'm resolutely, meaning fully, turn my thoughts to somebody that I can help. Why is that so important? Because my thoughts are focused on me. Typically, when I feel resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, or fear. Like when I'm feeling those things or going through those things, it's very me thinking about me and how I can get more or less or whatever the case is. So resolutely, meaning totally, turn my thoughts to somebody that I can help. Right? And that it doesn't say in specific another alcoholic. It says turn my thoughts to somebody that I can help. A lot of times it's very, it's maybe the last place that I look to be helpful, but my home is a really good place to start. Right? When I get maybe it's calling my spouse. Right? Maybe it's reaching out. My kids are little and they love when Daddy calls to talk to them on the phone. Right? Turn my thoughts to someone that I can help. There's maybe a list of people in my phone that I can make a phone call and resolutely turn my thoughts over to them. Because where does the problem reside with the alcoholic? Does it reside in the liquor store? Most people would, especially if they're, as far as with the big book, the problem doesn't reside in the liquor store. The problem doesn't reside in the pill bottles. Where the problem resides is in between my ears. Every time I relapsed, I did it sober. Right? Alcohol is not my problem. My thinking is my problem. So when it comes to disturbances throughout the day, to clean up the mess as I go along, I need to get out of here. The sooner I can get out of here, the better. So as we go through this step, the process is go upward, right? Go lateral, make amends if need be, and then resolutely turn my thoughts to somebody that I can help. Practical application of this step means that I do these things in that order as best that I can, right? That's the practical application is that. Am I batting 1,000, which is a baseball term for hitting every pitch that comes at me, right? No, not. I typically pay for those sorts of things, of not doing this every single time, with all sorts of, as the book describes it, absurd actions and ideas. What happens is, when a disturbance comes along, right? Let's use traffic again as an example. So traffic comes up, I'm stuck for a while, I'm late for work, what's my boss going to think of me? Am I going to get fired? I'm not going to get this, I'm not going to get that, and then I get to work. Then seemingly things start to pile up at work. Maybe a coworker is discussing things behind my back, or I think they're talking about me. Maybe I don't get that raise that I asked for. Right? Maybe it's a slow day at work, and my livelihood is contingent upon people coming in the door. I mean, you name it, whatever the process is. Maybe you're working from home, and it's not traffic. Maybe the internet's slow, right? Maybe the internet starts to slow down a little bit. Maybe your computer doesn't function properly, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, why is this? The world is against me. And then all of a sudden these little things start to happen, right? And then I get more disturbed, and more disturbed, and more disturbed. And then maybe when I get home, something that I think should happen has not happened, and I just blow up. And I get angry at whoever's in front of me. Maybe it's, a lot of times it's the people that live in our homes that get the backlash of me not doing a 10-step right away. Typically, it's the people that I live with. I get short, I get angry with them. I say something dumb, I do something dumb, whatever the case is. For me personally, not cleaning up as I go along leads to things that I try to find comfort internally with, things that are outside of me to fix whatever's going on the inside. For me, a lot of times it becomes gluttonous eating. That's a big outlet for me. When I don't correct as I go, right, then I'll start to try to fill the void with food or coffee or energy drinks or whatever it is, right? And then those thoughts compound on top of each other. Right? If I'm looking for something outside of me to fix something on the inside and I'm not drinking, I'm still going to be doing disturbing behavior that might be disturbing to the people in my life. For some people, the outlet is gambling. Right? Maybe it's stopping and getting a bunch of scratch-off tickets on the way home. Maybe it's stopping at the casino. Maybe it's online betting. Right? It's easy from our phones now. We can pull up all the lines on the sports games and start to bet away all of our money. Right? So the disturbances aren't just that. They might be something very small, seemingly insignificant to most people. But for an alcoholic like me, if they start to pile up, my thought process begins to go back inward. And then all of a sudden, I have no opportunity, and then I feel like I can't get out, and my brain starts to race again. And there's a lot of things that go into all that. It's not necessarily if I do one thing wrong, it's all of a sudden I'm going to pick up a drink. But eventually, if the mindset keeps going inward, I'm going to need relief somewhere, right? And this is what a proper 10-step can do. It gives us relief. Like the promises in the 10th step are some of the most beautiful promises in the book, right? It talks about ceasing fighting anything or anyone, right? It talks about being placed in a position of neutrality. Like those things, and they're right on the heels of the 9th step promises, right? Which we read a lot of times at meetings. Right, we're painstaking about this phase of this development. We'll be amazed before we're halfway through. So there's a lot of really beautiful things that this step is squished in between. But provided we're going to do these things as we go along and clean up as we go, we're going to have a pretty good shot. So, for example, very recently, so my wife and I, we see a counselor via Zoom, a marriage counselor. And this isn't anything that our marriage is off kilter. We just don't want it to get that way. As I was taught, prevention's kind of the best medicine, right? So we discuss things with this counselor, and we're trying to be as open and as honest as we can. Now, for me, I take things that I hear, and not only do I magnify them by 10,000, I don't talk about them. I stuff them in. I stuff them in. I stuff them in. And then all of a sudden I become this pressure cooker of emotion because I don't let it out. That's where our 10-step gives us relief, right? If I'm seeking relief from me, the 10-step gives me an opportunity to do that because I don't sit with just me anymore. Now I bring it to God. I bring it to somebody else, right? And then I make amends if I say or do something dumb. And then I take this, right, and I resolutely turn my thoughts to somebody that I can help. A lot of times that's the missed part of all this. If I'm disturbed heavily, right, sometimes for someone like me, it's easy to be like, God, remove this. It's almost like please, remove this from me. And then just sit back and wait, as opposed to continually doing the action that it's asking me to do. So when my wife and I, are doing these sessions, I have found in the very beginning, before I realized what was going on, after these sessions I get quiet, right? And then whether it's I go to work after that or whatever it is that I'm doing after that, I tend to be much more reserved. It's because I'm taking those seemingly negative or those things that happened in that session, and I just stuff them down and I hold them in. And that could be not only for the alcoholic can that be a very bad thing, but it also can be something that eventually will lead us to a point of needing real relief. So I found that after these things happen, if I have a really open discussion with my spouse or a really open discussion with my sponsor about what just happened, the relief comes from that. It turns out that I can't create my own relief center internally. And I'm only saying this because I've learned this along the way, not because I knew this going in. I had no idea. I thought maybe I could just kind of have my own release valve and everything would be okay. It's just not the case. So I have to do, and this is personally what I've found, is doing these things help to relieve the pressure that I create for myself, especially emotionally. I don't have a real good ability to manage my emotional states. I don't know if anyone's like me or not, but if I try to manage my emotional states, it's kind of like it tells us my life is unmanageable in the first step. It's the same thing as trying to balance my emotional states. Everyone always wants it. I want balance in my life. I want work-life balance. That sounds good, but as an alcoholic, I can't create balance just like I can't create manageability. I need help in that. I need help there. Right? And if I don't get help or even ask for help, it typically feels like life becomes chaotic and I have no control anymore. Right? That's why, for me, control is, whether it's compulsive eating or drinking energy drinks or whatever, I can control that. It's probably because I feel my life is out of control over here, therefore let me control this. The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. Right? It's not just a regular example of self-will run riot, but an extreme one. So where in my life do I feel like I have control of things? It's typically where things that aren't necessarily a positive kind of outlet for me, and it doesn't typically bode well for my family. So if I can kind of step back for a second and be open about really what's going on with me, then I have a better chance at having somebody, a third party, whether that's my sponsor, whether that's a spiritual advisor or somebody that I trust, or heck, maybe even God, to give me an inclination or an idea or an intuitive thought that maybe, just maybe, what I'm doing isn't helpful. Right? And I wish I could do that on my own. I wish I had the ability to just say, you know what, let's step back for a second. And anyone ever be in a, let's call it just a heated discussion with somebody that they love or somebody that they're close to, or even somebody at work? It's very difficult to be like, all right, time out, I'm going to go to my corner for a minute. And simply because I want to be right, especially with a discussion like that. Right? I just want to be right. I want to be heard and I want to be right. But for somebody like me, if I want to be heard and I want to be right, it typically, see how many I statements were in that sentence. I want to be heard. I want to be right. Listen to what I have to say. Right? A lot of I, my's, and me statements come along in that selfishness and self-centered person, right, that I can revert back to. And I wish it told me in this 10th step that those things would be removed, right? Those that selfish, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. You see, it's telling me when these crop up, right? When it's going to happen. And I'm not saying that as trying to be a negative statement. In fact, we could take these things and maybe I have an entirely new perception on these things. Maybe these things are opportunities not only to grow closer to my higher power, right, and cultivate that relationship with he, she, or it, right, but to actually use these things and propel into a closer relationship with the people that are closest to me. Maybe use these things and say, I'm not very good at having open discussions. I mean, I've said this to people in my work. Like, I'm not good at this confrontation. Let's discuss what's going on. I've said it at home a lot, and it's a humbling type statement to say, I'm not good at this. I'm not. Let's slow this down for a second and discuss these things. It's not easy. I'm not batting 1,000, but what I have found is when these things are implemented for me, it gets easier and easier as we go along, right? And the book doesn't tell us this, but it tells us in more ways than one, and it basically just did in this step is that life on life's terms are going to happen. That's a statement that gets said a lot in AA, right? When, right, dishonesty, resentments, fear, selfishness, and self-centeredness, when those crop up, that's life on life's terms for somebody like me. When something I deem not fit, or whatever the case is, or I don't like, right? It's very easy for those things to crop up. Just use an everyday today example when I put on the news, right? I mean, let's just call it what it is. I put the news on, I feel those things, and guess what I do? If I either do what this says, or I hold it in and I think I'm right. They're wrong, I'm right. Or yeah, they're right, and anyone who thinks that they're wrong is whatever. And then I start going off, and now all of a sudden, I'm in this cyclical type of emotion, and where I think that I'm right again. Right? There's so many examples of what we can do, and a lot of times, for people like us, we need that. We feel like we need this. It feeds me to feel resentment, right? It feeds me to be dishonest, and I'm only saying that from experience. And if we can do these things, right? It tells us right after that, right? We cease fighting anything or anyone, and it tells me that for by this time sanity will have returned. Again, practicing these things. Where does it tell me that I have a lack of sanity? In the second step. We get restored to sanity. The promise in the second step eventually is that we get restored to sanity. And this is where the 10th step restores us to sanity. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Right? So there's a way, right, to be restored to sanity, to be able to use the proper use of the will. Proper use of the will in the 10th step is saying something very simple like, thy will, not mine, be done. Right? That's proper use of the will. My favorite use of that is one that I've kind of done on my own, and I created because it's easy for me to remember. God save me from me so I can help you. Right? That's really what it comes down to. Save me from me. That's my little prayer. Right? And you could certainly use it because for a rockhead like me, it's easy to remember. Save me from me. Because if I look at the record, if I look back, right? When I get involved, when I steer the ship, when I mold the clay, if you fill in whatever metaphor you want, when I take charge, I typically run it directly into the ground. Typically. Some things I can get away with being successful at. But when it comes to trying to manage certain emotional states, I'm just not that great at it. So God save me from me. Because I can mess this up. And I will, and I can, and I maybe am going to do that. Save me from me so I can help you. So then again, I can resolutely turn my thoughts to somebody that I can help, open my eyes up a little bit, and just maybe someone gets placed in front of me for an opportunity to help. Whether it's holding the door for someone, I know that's like a corny example, but it's really true. There's little things that we can do throughout the day to resolutely turn our thoughts to somebody that we can help. And provided that we know that we're going to get disturbed, maybe we do those things anyway in spite of me and looking out for somebody else. So thank you guys for letting me share. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
All right, please limit your sharing to 3 minutes.